Hello, everybody. I am Mavis Dawson, and I am going to speak to you tonight or today about the book of my choice. And the title of it is Trauma Responsive Strategies for Early Childhood. And this is a book that was written by a lady, Dr. Katie Statman-Weil, who actually brings 18 years of experience as a teacher and a psychotherapist to the table in terms of working directly with children or students who have been traumatized. She has a relationship-based framework of study in that she tries to teach the whole student and not limit herself to traditional practices that we have or see every day in regular school settings. Dr. Weil wrote this book. The whole purpose of it is to give teachers or educators the tools that they need to help reach and teach students who have experienced trauma. What we know about trauma in terms of school is that we have a lot of angry children, but we don't know why they're angry. And when you take the time to get to know the students, you find out that a lot of things that have happened to them has happened that was out of their control. There are 4 types of trauma that she discusses in her book. The first one, and I'll just tell you the names of them. One of them is acute trauma. Then she spoke about complex trauma. Then she spoke of intergenerational trauma and racism trauma. So acute trauma is really simple. It's something that happens just sporadically. It could be witnessing a violent act. It's one incident most of the time, but the impact of it has a traumatic effect on the child. It could be witnessing their mom being attacked by their dad or her boyfriend. So acute trauma affects children a great deal as well. Then she spoke of complex trauma, and complex trauma is complex. It's like repeated traumas. It's something that is unpredictable because it only happens during certain times, and it's sporadic. And the example that she used was a child who was being molested by her grandmother's boyfriend. And because he wouldn't do it when the grandmother was around, that's what made it unpredictable. However, it was spontaneous. It was something that could just happen. So complex trauma can follow a child, and it attacks, it attacks their emotional well-being, their cognitive development, and other areas of development. And then she spoke of intergenerational trauma. And intergenerational trauma is trauma that's also known as being historical, because historical trauma is like community-wide. It's trauma that a whole ethnic group of people experience. What does it look like? It looks like poverty. It looks like trauma or the descendants of slaves are affected in a negative way due to societal oppressions and things of that nature. It could be people who have survived, the survivors of the Holocaust, or the indigenous people who experienced genocide. So historical trauma goes way back and comes forward to where we are now. Then we have racial trauma, which is one of the most painful kinds of trauma for children because it deals with the threat of emotional violence or physical violence. So what does that look like in school? Well, you have a higher number of black students being suspended as opposed to white students. The third way gate exam. A lot of our children are being held back because they cannot pass it in 3rd grade, which is another story altogether. So these are the 4 traumas that she addresses in her book. What I would like to speak to you about now is the summary itself. Dr. Weil proposes that we can no longer, teachers, educators, administrators can no longer use a blanket approach to address the behavior issues of children who have been traumatized. Those children need specialized care. And where they can get that care is the new trend that is rapidly rising, and they are called trauma response schools. There are 16 of those schools in America right now. But a trauma response school is a school that is designed with with those kinds of children in mind. Their everyday schools routines are not the same as traditional classroom settings. Their routines involve them being taught how to deal with social emotional learning skills throughout the day. They're not restricted to having to do 90 minutes of a reading block or 60 minutes of math or things of that nature. They are taught how to cope with the issues that are holding them back socially and academically. And it can happen anytime during the day, so they need the autonomy to address those issues during the day. Now, the usefulness and applicability of this study, it transcends from trauma response schools into regular classroom settings, because the way that this book is written, she uses case studies at the beginning of each chapter so that you can get an idea and formulate in your mind what the child is going through. Then she tells you the strategies that you can use in the classroom, any classroom, not just trauma response schools, but in any classroom setting, these strategies can be transferable into that setting. So that is the usefulness of it, and we can only appreciate that as an educator. Now, in terms of the weakness of the book, I thought that the only one, was that we didn't know how the students turned out. And I felt like she could have done a better job with giving us an idea of how they progress or regress. We know that trauma affects students in different ways, and one of the biggest ways that I'm reminded of is that they're always tired. They're exhausted when they come to school. Now I know. Now I understand, thanks to this book. Now I feel confident in speaking and knowing what I can do to help a child in my classroom. We know that they don't have a long attention span. We know that they can't focus. A lot of times, just like she said in the book, they're having flashbacks. But we can address all of those issues. Based on this book, she talks about the brain and the neuroplasticity of the brain and how it works to help us change our outcomes, because it's like a superpower, because it enables them to change with every experience. Anybody, it helps us to change with every experience that we are exposed to or encounter. So when children are traumatized, with the right tools, they can overcome it if they are given the care and the attention that they need. Now, here's one of another strength of her book. She actually embraced another study, and it was called the ACE study. The ACE study, ACE, is for adverse childhood experiences. And these two doctors, they actually studied a group of people over a long period of time. And these people were traumatized as children. They followed them into adulthood, and what they found was that when their traumas were not addressed or treated, it manifested in their physical health. So they were sick. They encountered health problems as a result of not addressing the trauma that happened to them. And she talks about that in this book, which is, one more strength in her book. Also, I wanted to address, she said it was something to the effect that we know that children who experience trauma can grow up and become angry children. We can no longer sit on the sidelines and not address why our children or our students are angry, because angry children will become angry adults. And if we do not do something to help them overcome the trauma that they are experiencing, then we'll probably pay for it later, because we're either going to profit by or we are going to pay for whatever they become. So it behooves us as educators to jump in and use and try to help curtail these negative behaviors and patterns and try to meet them where they are and bring them where they need to be. This book was a very well-written book. Like I said, she offers you strategies, she offers you case studies so that you can follow along with each step. She does talk about the development of creating what she called an ISP team, the individual support planning team, which consists of the teacher, the student, not the student, the teacher, the parent, the administrator, the physical therapist who will be in the building, as well as counselors. All of them are in trauma response schools. So they're right there on deck, hands-on, and they can address those students' needs right away. So again, this trend in education or early education, it is on the rise. I can certainly appreciate her efforts. I love the fact that she took the time to learn about the strategies and how we can apply them. And by the way, her strategies are research-based. So it's not like she concocted them in her head. We've been using many of her strategies already, but she compiled all of them and made an awesome book. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak with you about my book of choice. I do hope you learned something about trauma response schools and the different kinds of traumas and how they affect students. Thank you. Have a good evening. Goodbye.